Our next talk, I'm excited about for a couple different reasons. The first reason, and anyone who is a fan of the movie Billy Madison might be picking up on this in the title, which is a reference to that movie. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. I know it's not good. And for any other Billy Madison fans, I'm drinking out of my mug that says, "That's quacktastic." It's a blue duck. So that's one reason I'm excited about this talk, the Billy Madison references, but more importantly, arguably, it's going to be talking about feedback. Garrett's going to be talking about a really tough topic. Feedback is absolutely essential to any CTI analyst success, right? We need to know if our consumers, our products are getting through, if they're hitting their requirements, but it's really tough for our consumers to give us that feedback. So Garrett Ginnivan is going to give us some tips on that. Garrett, I see you're joining. We see you there. And so you should be able to click into your slides in just a moment. And of course, if you have questions for Garrett or the chatter, head over to your Slack channel, hallway Garrett Ginnivan. Hopefully I said your last name right. Sometimes I'm terrible. Woohoo! Well, that's awesome. Excellent.
You did, Katie. Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's an honor to speak today. So I appreciate this across the board. So again, my name is Garrett Ginnivan. I'm currently a threat analyst at Proofpoint with the People-Centric Security Program. And again, it's an honor to speak today. And really what we want to talk about today is improving that producer and customer feedback within the cyber threat intelligence lifecycle. And with my current position at Proofpoint, I'm kind of a customer-facing analyst, and I work with a great team of people and have an even greater team of people supporting the larger kind of threat intelligence apparatus that Proofpoint has. And today, when it comes down to the agenda, there's the Billy Madison reference for you. This is basically how I felt in all of my briefings as a junior officer in the Army Reserves. And first off, who am I? Who is this guy? I'll have a couple key takeaways today. I'll go kind of a quick baseline of what feedback is and what are the main kind of points, feedback in CTI, and then some small takeaways that consumers and producers can improve. So I know with the cyber threat intelligence piece here for this training summit, it's very much focused on producers. I'm a producer myself right now from that standpoint, but also talking about both consumers and producers from kind of the two buckets. And then, of course, it's a feedback presentation, so I have to have the thank yous and a few sources as well. And Katie, you're one of the many thank yous I'm going to have at the very end. But again, I'm very happy to be speaking today and honored to be able to have this time. So again, threat analyst at Proofpoint, and you can see what I can kind of consider the Plinko career journey that I've taken. So I started off on the very top. I actually did dairy judging while I was in high school. I went into turfgrass science at Penn State, worked the masters of all things. I went to Indiana University and learned foreign languages. So I'm a mediocre Persian linguist at best, very much a mediocre runner and a fan of single malts and bourbons. And then from there, I've worked in the cyber threat intelligence field supporting Army and Navy customers, had to get a little shot in at the Navy. And then most recently at the Department of Energy and now currently at Proofpoint. So one of the bigger pieces that, yes, anybody can get into information security, anybody can get into cyber threat intelligence. I know there's a lot of great talks about that right now of getting in and just getting your foot in the door and making an impact. So yes, even myself who did dairy judging and worked the masters and worked literally for turfgrass and golf courses can get into cyber threat intelligence. So kind of the key takeaways today, where I know everyone listening right now, you're dealing with multiple things, whether it's kids, hopefully mine stay quiet during this presentation, but basically looking at feedback as a true section of the intelligence lifecycle within CTI and treating it as that when we look at the larger intelligence pieces that we see. Also looking at feedback as a two-way street with different vehicles. So not everyone needs a Tesla, and that's kind of one of the pieces when we think about, okay, you can get feedback via face-to-face briefings, virtual briefings like this, emails, surveys. There's a variety of different ways to do that, and it's all different tools in your toolbox to get the feedback that you want to make that cyber threat intelligence better and better day in and day out. One of the big pieces here, especially for the Cyber Threat Intelligence Summit, is mind the assumption gap, mind your assumptions, mind your biases, and really just ask with a caveat. So being able to think about when we look at some of the statistics and realizing that no one can read minds, whether it's in cyber threat intelligence or if it's in just day-to-day with your personal lives, working with spouses, friends, colleagues, those kind of pieces. Mind that assumption gap, and that's even more important for your producers. and consumers in the CTI field. And just to keep us a little bit light, for lack of a term, we all stink at feedback. We're all really bad at it. No one is a top tier feedback person. Incremental change is key for yourself as a producer or as a consumer. And I'll have some pieces of that to think about. And that really comes down to that growth mindset for producers and consumers, where you're opening yourself up a little bit on both sides to let the other person know about what you're thinking and how best to make everything better. So starting from a very basic level, the three main types of feedback that we think about, where we always say, hey, we want feedback, we love feedback, we want feedback, breaking it down to the three main portions. And I'll have the sources for the books that are my top kind of go-to resources. But evaluation, that's more along the lines of your end of your evaluations with your bosses or vice versa, along the lines of testing. And what we think about from the common CTI feedback bucket, that's really kind of the best term that I can think about, especially for if you've taken the SANS 578 class, is getting things into buckets. This is what we think about when we say we want feedback. So being able to have that coaching when you're in a producer-consumer relationship to say, hey, when should I get this to you? When do you need it? In what format? Those kind of things, that coaching is really the main portion that we think about. And honestly, everybody loves appreciation. Everybody loves to be told that was really good, that was helpful. And there's different anecdotal pieces, but those are the two main buckets when you think at feedback as a whole writ large. And then we'll go down into the next kind of steps and break it down a little bit further into the kind of cyber threat lifecycle. So I'm also a big fan of Ron Swanson and Parks and Rec. So I'll have some GIFs and memes throughout the presentation just to keep it a little bit light. But honestly, when you think about the anecdotal feedback, appreciation, that was good, thanks. That is useful, but it's not as useful as it could be. And we'll have a little bit more on the example side as I go through the different pieces here. And one of my favorites is you put blood, sweat, and tears into a research project, a cyber threat intelligence product, research writing edits, getting lit up by your editors, whatever it may be. And then you get a read with interest or you hear absolutely nothing. It's one of those things where it's really frustrating, but it's also, we'll work to better ingest that and have better ideas of how to deal with that. And then unclear, just depending on if you don't have the right metrics or the right tools to see that feedback. And then the stuff that we've always seen before, the non-substance off base, for example, hey, Garrett, your talk was good today, but I hate your face and I hate Indiana. I'm a Purdue fan. So I'm like, okay, I get that, but did you actually get something from the actual presentation? So things like that, where these are kind of what we normally see, I think, within the kind of cyber threat intelligence realm. And I'll be able to show some other pieces of feedback, which I think are more helpful and really get down to the specifics and helping both the producer and consumer. So just having these two charts here, this is the traditional feedback, the feedback cycle within cyber threat intelligence or intelligence. And these probably look familiar to most of the people that are listening here today, but I like the joint pub on the bottom left with the feedback as a continuous part of the cycle. And I really like that because it does happen when you think about feedback and evaluation for your planning, your collection, exploitation. When you think about working and getting research ideas, working with your fellow analysts, with your colleagues, you get feedback saying, hey, that's not a good idea. Use this source, use this source. Analysis and production, everybody knows you've been lit up by all kinds of different editors throughout your entire life saying, hey, you forgot a period there, don't space it that way. You forgot the Oxford comma, may God have mercy upon your soul. Things like that, where they keep you in check, they make sure it's a standard. And that entire feedback process is pretty constant. And then I really like the intelligence lifecycle. I like kind of these both because when you look at the intelligence cycle on the right from Recorded Future and the original source from GroupSense, it shows feedback as a true portion of that entire cycle. And it also talks about two-way communications, which I'll go into next. But it's a really good idea when you think about from a larger feedback perspective and what to do about it. And some of my recommendations here, you think about feedback as a true portion of that cycle. Think about all the personnel within the cycle that you have for the larger cyber threat intelligence production process, where you have your editors, you have your researchers, you have your tools, you have all these people dedicated to these certain jobs, and feedback is such a huge portion of this. And sometimes we don't have the right amount of staffing or personnel for it. And there's different pieces to that, but I think it's something to think about as we go forward for other cyber threat intelligence teams when it comes down to pulling that feedback together and creating actions off of it. So going one step down and really kind of hammering home the point of the two-way feedback, two-way street within feedback. So this threatravens.com has a really good threat intelligence lifecycle phases that I sourced here at the bottom and I have at the end of the product. But basically looking at the cyber threat intelligence producer standpoint in that dark blue box in the center. And I highlighted in red, very simple graphics, bidirectional feedback for these producers and these consumers. So you can see the bidirectional arrows, and that goes from if you're thinking yourself inside that actual dark blue box inside of threat intelligence, you're producing intelligence to your IR, your SOC teams, your tactical level personnel, also on the strategic side with your leadership, fraud management, risk analysis, and it's bidirectional. So you're getting feedback, they're giving you feedback, and that's more along the lines of that coaching and appreciation. But one of the things I think we don't think about as much is think about that producer that's one level removed. So think about your sources. Think about, for example, if you're at a vendor or an intelligence shop, think about your primary sources, your secondary sources. Think about the people who are updating the products and pieces that you have within your tools, within your systems. People are doing all the back-end work on the databases and the forward-facing GUIs for your products, your tools. Think about those people as well, because everyone thinks if you're a producer, you're always thinking, oh man, I don't get enough feedback. I don't know what's exactly happening. I don't know if they actually use this. Think about that, but one more layer removed for those people that are doing a lot of this back-end work. They have almost no idea sometimes of how any of their tools are being used, or even if you're using them. So I think thinking about that in a larger sense. So if you're in that middle section, you're in kind of that traditional cyber threat intelligence role, speaking with customers, providing things for customers. Also think about the people that are helping you produce what you produce. So that producer one level removed, I think, is absolutely key when it comes down to completing that feedback life cycle and really empowering the people that help you produce and then producing an even better product for your customers. So I think that's one of the big things that I think we really don't think about much, but I think it's worth highlighting here. And I really like this graphic with some of my very simple just highlights when we look at feedback as a whole inside of this larger cycle. So going kind of the next step, and we talked about it before, where no one is good at feedback. It's hard, but at the same time, I took a snapshot from the SANS 2021 CTI survey for measuring effectiveness, and there's multiple different ways to do it, but I highlighted in red just looking at requesting feedback on performance from CTI consumers. So that was only 40% of respondents said yes, they do that. So looking at that, you see 60% don't request feedback, and there's a lot of nuance and other pieces to this, but it's one of those things where you don't know if you don't ask. And then I always say, as with anything we think about with cyber threat intelligence, there's a caveat or there's context. So asking, but being specific. And being specific, I think, is one of the key takeaways for anything feedback related. Don't just ask for feedback. Don't ask for, hey, how is our program? You've been with us for 5 years. Being very specific with your feedback ask, I think, is really, really key. So one of those pieces that you can kind of take away, and what I think about is kind of an easy way to think about it, is bite-sized chunks with bite-sized groups. And I realize I'm talking to now thousands of people, and hopefully even more will listen to this recording, but thinking about bite-sized groups to get the feedback that you're looking for as a kind of traditional cyber threat or intelligence producer is think about if you're someone on the tactical or technical side, and you're a IT messaging person, and you're getting a briefing from a vendor or from your producer, and it's 100 people on the briefing, and your boss and your boss's boss are on that briefing. You're probably not going to give the feedback that that producer wants. If they say, hey, does anybody have any questions? Is there anything wrong with this? With that level of forum, you're probably not going to have someone on that technical level be like, hey, Garrett, yeah, that was really good. Or can we talk a little bit more about this? Or that was completely wrong. You suck at everything you do. And it's very different levels of feedback, but it's just something to think about, where someone is going to do that most likely in front of their bosses or in front of that larger quorum. So having that smaller bite-sized group for some of these ways to get feedback, I think, is absolutely key. And you can't always have a small group, but kind of working towards that and getting those different customer buckets of, say, like your security teams, your IT messaging, your training teams, and breaking them into the normal, what we could see as strategic, operational, and tactical customers is something great to think about, to really have those bite-sized groups to get that bite-sized chunk of feedback from your customers or your consumers. And really, when we talk about being specific too, I think when you think about the asking for feedback and knowing it's good again, knowing being good at it, I think it's something to think about as well, is having some of the backups for your briefings and planning that and being specific. So being specific for yourself too. And I'll go a little bit more into that as well, but with your briefings, think about having that time for feedback. Think about having that time for that post talk. So it's something like this for SANS. Luckily, we have this Slack channel and the workshop and those kind of pieces afterwards for people to follow up with me. But this is one of the hard things about Zoom, about Teams, about these virtual environments, that you don't have that time where you can go grab cocktails with somebody afterwards and talk more and more about this and have that feedback and get that one-on-one interaction. So I think it's important to plan that within your briefings if you can, and be specific about kind of how you present and planning that time out with your customers and consumers. So everyone knows within the cyber threat intelligence field, or likely knows or have heard about the pyramid of pain from David Bianco. I believe it was back in 2014 that he first did this. And I created just a simple pyramid of pain, but for feedback. So it all starts with him and his mindset of the pyramid of pain, and looking at hashes, IOCs, TTPs, and how that gets progressively harder. I'm trying to think the same way and provide a snapshot for everyone listening here from a feedback perspective of thinking about techniques that start from the easiest way to do it, going up to very much the hardest when it comes down to inputs for time, effort, and energy. So an email alias, again, it's very, very simple when you think about it, but you see it on CISA products, you see it on FBI, probably a lot of your vendor or other producer products, having a simple email alias that you can respond back. And even if it's just saying, hey, that report was great, so-and-so details, that's really helpful, because it starts the process. It starts the process of being able to receive that feedback, and it's right there at the end of a product, at the beginning of a product. I recommend putting it, if you can, at the front and at the beginning. Sometimes if it's an executive customer, as an example, they might not make it down to page 5, page 6, or page 20 if you get to that level of product. So if they see that, they like the executive summary, they like a piece, they can respond back more quickly. So that's kind of the easiest. And then going one level up, we look at emails and surveys. So when we talk about email and surveys, again, be specific. That's one of the pieces that is a constant piece I talk about here, but it rings true throughout the entire pyramid and really throughout the entire feedback kind of mindset, is that being specific with emails. So asking someone for feedback on a product, ask them about specific, like, okay, did the IOCs in this format work for you? Do you need it in another format? You can ask about timelines specifically. You can ask specific things about maybe the executive summary, was that in the right place? Things like that, when it comes down to very specific pieces that you need to know to be able to tailor those products even better. And then surveys, again, SANS is awesome with this, especially during this this entire summit and training, is that they have those surveys at the end of every talk. And it's really nice too, because when you think about surveys, I feel like a lot of people, companies, producers, and consumers will send out a survey and basically touchdown, you can spike the football in the end zone, you're good to go. I think you really have to think about following up. And it's not to be annoying to follow up and say, hey, every single day, like asking someone to fill out a survey for you. Don't do that, but following up and saying, hey, so-and-so consumer or customer, I just want to let you know that we sent a survey. Let them know first off, because as with everybody knows, you get probably hundreds, if not thousands of emails a day from different people. You're getting pulled in multiple directions. Your kid could be trying to bother you at the same time. So being able to tell your consumers or customers, saying, hey, the survey came at this date, at this time, being specific and following up with them. So say you're in a meeting, they can go in that meeting and find that directly, and it saves them time, effort, and energy to provide that feedback that you want via the survey. Going one level up and looking at briefings and face-to-face communications, obviously this is a lot more difficult. You have to have the right personnel. It requires a lot of coordination, as everybody knows. Trying to schedule Zoom and Teams meetings or other meetings on a virtual or even face-to-face scale is very difficult when you look at agendas. And again, being specific, thinking about agendas where you can kind of give that heads up to your consumer or your customer to let them know, hey, this is what I'd like to talk about. I want to talk about getting feedback on these pieces. Because if you think about it, say you're in an internal meeting and someone says, hey, Garrett, give me that. I want you to brief right now on this, or I want you to give me that information right now. It takes you back a second. You're caught off guard. You might not be real happy about it. Think about that from a customer or consumer standpoint. You want to be able to give someone forewarning, let them know what you'd like to talk about. So it's not, because you never know. And that's something too, when we think about this, I think about all the people watching today. I wouldn't want to just call someone out and say, hey, can you do this, this, and this for me? You're probably dealing with kids, pets, everything else, working from home. It could be midnight your time right now. Who knows? So being able to have that agenda, I think, is really key, and being specific with that, I think, is absolutely crucial. And again, that just takes more time. It takes more effort and more inputs of time and energy. So that's why it's kind of one level up for me. With the briefings and face-to-face communications, just to highlight too, I think you look at being able to plan that time. So I'm getting better and better with it, but I think having that time to take that pause. And if I were to be in an open forum today, I would take that pause and say, hey, do we have any ideas about this? Do you disagree with this? Being able to take that time to allow yourself to take a breath as a briefer, but also allowing the customer to say, hey, I have a question about this. I have a question about this. I think it's something to really plan into your entire planning process with these briefings, these face-to-face communications. And it's more difficult, but it's more things to think about. And that kind of leads into the next step, where I was between putting a dedicated feedback person or personnel and switching that with briefings and face-to-face communication. And it kind of ties in well, but I think it's even more difficult, where everyone knows here that talent in the cybersecurity field is something that is always lacking. And when you look at the cyber threat intelligence field, sometimes you just don't have the amount of people to do this. But I really think it's crucial to even just have a part-time duty, an additional duty, or an additional, whether it's a additional offering for that person, whether if they're a full-time analyst or if they're doing something else at the back end, to have that dedicated feedback person to pull everything together, to make sure that people are listening to the right feedback. You have these parts of the pyramid already kind of set up. And really, again, just kind of thinking about that when in cyber threat intelligence as a true part of the life cycle, and kind of treat it as such. And this is going to be a more mature program and higher up the pyramid, but it's something to think about as having that dedicated person for that dedicated slice of that life cycle. And then lastly, at the very top of the pyramid, growth mindset. That comes down to building off of everything you have here inside of this pyramid, but also thinking about, it comes down to building trust between the consumer and producer. And honestly, that takes a lot of time, effort, energy, and it takes a lot of things to go right, along with having these virtual meetings, creating that relationship. That takes a long time, and that's why it's up at the top for me. And it's built upon everything else, but that's what everybody strives for within that producer and consumer relationship. So from that perspective, there's a lot of different pieces in there, little nuggets, I think, that are good takeaways. But when it comes down to, if you're listening and you're in a consumer seat, think about communication and taking a little bit of extra time. So we talked about the assumption gap. The assumption gap is real, and that's not just for producers and consumers here, just in the little bubble of cyber threat intelligence. It's in everyday lives for you. Think about your spouse, your partner, your friend, your colleague. No one knows what you're thinking. No one can read minds. And that's very much the same with producers and consumers. So being able to create that trust and as a consumer, let your producer know that, hey, this is my timeline. This is my needs. I'm able to see this. I'm able not to see this. I don't need this. Where that negative feedback just seems a little bit callous, but it's absolutely helpful and useful for your producer, because you don't know unless someone tells you, or if you can't read minds. And taking a little bit of extra time. So this is where helping your producers produce, which is a little bit repetitive, but it really comes down to, for your top producers, for the stuff that you really love and that you can't live without, if you haven't told someone about that, if you haven't given that appreciation, you haven't given that feedback, make sure to do that, because you don't want to have your best producers lose their jobs, lose their positions. It's one of those things where taking a little bit extra time is really helpful. And on the flip side, I know people are probably saying, well, I can't give feedback 24/7 and do it every single night of the week. And think about it from like an Amazon purchase perspective. If you gave feedback to every single vendor on Amazon, it would be a full-time job. But thinking about those best people, those best producers, and taking a little bit of extra time, again, just kind of planning, thinking about it in your mind, and taking that time to provide that feedback, I think is something that's worthwhile, even just putting in 15 minutes in your calendar once a week to provide feedback on products you ingest, those kind of pieces. I think it's a great opportunity to do that and to plan that into your schedule. Looking at the producer, we talked about the multiple feedback vehicles. You can have everything from traditional and formal. And then also I think one of the things that most people don't think about is also feedback by proxy. So having that secondhand information, whether it's working through one of your sales personnel or one of your colleagues or friends that has a better relationship with the actual consumer, always feel free to use that. It's a great way to start. It's not 100%. It's not that direct feedback, that direct trust, but it's a way to build that. And we've already talked about the formal and kind of traditional pieces, and don't count out just having cocktails and conversations with your consumers or your friends who might have a relationship with that consumer. And we've already hit this point, but feedback is a true section of intelligence, and having that full or part-time person, if you can, centralizing those findings and thinking about that assumption gap, which goes both ways for producer and consumer. And this is the other version of Ron Swanson for Parks and Rec. And again, these are specific short examples, but basically you can have great info, Splunk rules implemented. It's specific, it's short, it tells the producer how it was used. And it can even be negative feedback saying, hey, Garrett, you completely missed the mark. It's really late. We need something in a different time frame. Again, people can't read minds, and it's really helpful because then we can change and we can provide you a better product at a better time. So again, large theme of today's presentation, keep it specific, and you'll be in a good spot when it comes down to providing that feedback and thinking about it on a grander scale. So to conclude everything, when we think about just the larger perspective, everyone is human, flawed, and we all suck at feedback. And it's meant to be a little bit funny and hopefully kind of get you out of your chair a little bit. Basically, working towards a growth mindset is one of the biggest things when we think about from a producer and consumer relationship. And it seems very lofty, but that's the larger goal that we see as being the top of that pyramid. Consider feedback as a true section of the intelligence lifecycle. It's part of the maturation process. Think about different ways to elicit feedback. If you're a producer, talk with your consumer, and vice versa. It's a two-way street. There's multiple ways to do it. And again, not everybody needs a Tesla. Sometimes a minivan will work, or for myself, an old 2009 Rogue is perfectly fine for myself as an example. And then minding the assumption gap and communicate. Not everybody knows what you're thinking. Same thing with your spouse, partner, best friend, and just ask with the caveat and be specific. Be specific with everything you do, and think about it more of as part of the natural planning process. So I appreciate everybody's time today. I want to give thank yous just in general because it's a feedback presentation, and I obviously have to do that. And I just wanted to highlight a lot of the people that have really helped me along the way. The Proofpoint team, Alan Ferdinand, email security guru, just a great human being. Selena Larson and Josh Miller, two great analysts that are part of our larger threat research team and the larger Proofpoint threat information service that we have at Proofpoint, which has been supremely helpful to me on my maturation process as an analyst. And when I talk about the other portions that have kind of got me to where I'm here now, the Dragos team as a whole, the SANS 578 class was absolutely crucial for me. I was lucky that I was able to get it through my reserve duties. Joe Slowick's operational threat intelligence class is a great one. And then Sergio's diamond model, which has been referenced here and is referenced really probably in every single presentation. Also his blogs about personal and mental health, I think were incredibly helpful to me as a whole. I talk about my government team members and the ways that I've worked in the cyber threat field as a whole prior to Proofpoint. Again, thank you to everyone there, the editors that probably wanted to hit me multiple times about some of the stupid things that I would do with my writing, identifying my bias, keeping me in check, and just a great bunch of, for lack of a term, hardworking Americans and great people. Also, the VeteranSec community, the VetSec community, I just want to say thank you. That's a 501c3 that helps veterans get into the InfoSec field as a whole. Great mentorship, helped me get more into CTI training, the whole perspective. Mike Domish has really helped me with speaking and overall kind of general life pieces. He's a great person, and I really appreciate that. I wouldn't be here without him. And then Katie, you introduced me. It's absolutely an honor. And I just want to say thank you to yourself and Andy Piazza kind of getting people into the cyber threat intelligence field, creating those resources. They were absolutely helpful for me, and honestly, just two great people in the field that we need. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody here. I appreciate the time today, being able to talk and have this time and kind of start this conversation about feedback, which I think is crucial for the entire cyber threat intelligence kind of apparatus. And sources, one of the lesser known PDFs, what the intelligence community doesn't know is hurting the United States, I think is a great one. Thanks for the feedback. Feedback and Other Dirty Words and Let's Talk are kind of my three go-to resources for books. And then I will get more information. There's a feedback talk from some Mandiant and formerly FireEye personnel. I'm trying to find more information about that, but that's another great resource. They go into a whole nother level of technical detail with this piece, and I hope to work with them in the future. And again, I just want to say thank you to everybody for listening to this. And again, just be specific, reach out to me with questions. I'll be in the Slack channel after this. And yeah, thank you again. I appreciate this. And it's been an absolute honor to be a part of this presentation in this organization.